Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to our pretty much weekly privacy chat. I'm joined by our Managing Director for Europe, Rob Van Eyck, and in our Europe office, Christina Mikalakaki. Are you in Brussels now, or are you in Greece right now?
I'm in Greece now. We have a long weekend coming on, and I took 2 days off, so I will be enjoying these holidays.
Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks for the amazing work that you and the team with Sebastio did on this report. We've lost Seb to the European Data Protection Supervisor, where he's joined their staff. We're sorry to lose him, but we're always proud of the fact that many of our team over the years have started with us and grown and gone on off into leadership roles in government, in civil society, in academia, in companies. So really delighted to have a chance to discuss this report. Our team will post a link to it in the comments. The Privacy by Design, Privacy by Default, and Article 25 Working Party Report. Before we started, I was telling Christina and Rob that I was sorry today that I'm working from home and at the office, because I have proudly on my wall a framed certificate proclaiming that I'm a Privacy by Design ambassador that then Ontario Privacy Commissioner Anne Cavoukian gave to me. But the place I first stumbled across this concept long before GDPR was when I was a chief privacy officer at an ad tech company. And we kept having a very interesting problem, and it persists even today. What was the problem? Depending on how you set up a form on your site, we all know that the URLs and the ad tags are the method of passing data from page to page, and sometimes from page to third party. Well, it turns out that people who were setting up an ad tag, perhaps because they wanted to know whether people who were seeing an ad were coming to purchase at a site, were setting it up in a manner that when you then filled out to purchase your credit card or your other personal details, it was being sent to the ad tech company, which was us. And then we would get criticized. Look at all this personal information. You claim that your cookies are anonymous. You claim your ad tech is not causing any trouble. Look, we see email addresses. We see credit being sent to you. Now, of course, we didn't want this. And so what did I do after, this became a well-known problem and we were always being criticized? Well, I sent emails and letters to all of the publishers and all the advertisers, alerting them, listen, you have to set up your form properly. And you know what happened? They kept doing it improperly, and we kept being embarrassed that we were getting personal information that we didn't want. So finally, even after many emails and education, finally, what happened? I said to the engineering team, I need to be able to say the next time this happens, and a media reach out or a regulator reaches out, I need to say, even if the client is setting it up improperly, we have designed that we do not get the information we do not want. We will not rely solely on our policy saying, oh, we don't really use this information. So, maybe we're getting it, but we don't use it. Or clients, we have to assume that people make mistakes, and we need to design the technology to ensure that it only works as our law and policy intend. And at that time, this was what I thought privacy by design meant. Well, obviously, Commissioner Cavoukian was very effective at helping advance and give a label context. Sure enough, we saw this concept, which was relatively novel at the time, show up in law in GDPR. But there's more background to it. So, Christina, let me turn to you for a little bit more of this background of how we went from kind of a concept, a tagline, a branding, with principles, certainly, to a legislative mandate.
Yes. Thank you, Jules, for this very interesting introduction. So Basically, we start the report and we conclude the report on the same note, saying how important this obligation is. And I think it's pretty simple to understand why it is so important and why we had to incorporate it in our GDPR. Because basically, on the shoulders of this obligation lies the whole structure of the GDPR. And I think this is very simple to understand because, in very clear words, controllers need to ensure that they embed privacy and data protection from the very beginning of their processing activities. So, in one phrase, data protection can never be an afterthought after incorporating this core obligation. And this is, of course, in a theoretical level. So, after conducting our research, one of the very important findings is that actually this obligation is important in practice because we see so many DPAs enforcing Article 25 GDPR. And the reason why this finding is extremely important is because when this obligation was first incorporated into the GDPR, we have been hearing a lot of claims that it's extremely broad, it's extremely vague, and we will not be seeing individual cases applying like DPAs applying Article 25 GDPR in individual cases. In fact, we found more than 160 cases applying this article. So this is an enormous number. And I think maybe that is still a bit theoretical for our audience. So I can give like a story to make it even more interesting. So when I first started working on this research and tracking decisions enforcing Article 25 GDPR, I was also like I started in September. So the research ended last month, let's say. And of course, during that time, I was attending conferences, I was engaging with privacy professionals. And, one of the main icebreakers that you're gonna have with privacy professionals is what are you focusing lately? What are you doing? In which sector are you? And I would go to a conference and someone would tell me, well, I'm focusing on health data. And I would say, oh, I'm focusing on data protection by design and by default. And I found a very interesting case from Italy, where health personnel had unrestricted access to health records of persons who were not treated by them. And of course, the Italian DPA said, well, this is a breach of the principle of lawfulness and also of Article 25 GDPR. And the person would tell me, well, of course, Article 25 GDPR is extremely important when it comes to sensitive data and health data. And then I would go to a roundtable about privacy enhancing technologies. And I would say, I am focusing on data protection by design. And I found a really nice case from the Greek DPA saying that a telecom provider can store traffic data for statistical purposes, but he has to anonymize the data and not just pseudo-anonymize it. And because the telecom provider had just pseudo-anonymized the data, the Greek DPA imposed a really high fine of 6,000 euro. So, what I'm trying to say is that there is no chance that you will walk into a room full of privacy professionals and you will say, I'm focusing on data protection by design and by default. And they will tell you, well, this is irrelevant to what I'm doing. No chance. So, you start realizing how this is relevant to every sector and every kind of processing. And you can see it in our report. We have cases with involving high-tech technology, cutting-edge technology, and very simple processing activities as well. So I think this is something very important to keep in mind on why this is a fundamental obligation.
Christina, though, the struggle I had when this was first in the text, and I would talk to regulators and I'd say, what is in here that is not already clearly required by all the other language. Um, is this adding in some manner and telling me that having only an organizational policy, don't access the data of the other clients, but no, we're not technically preventing you. And so by the fact that it is relevant to everything, is it anything of its own? And I think that's one of the really big contributions of the report. Although I would say, if I jump to the end, it's not yet fully clear. I mean, can I be 100% GDPR compliant, but fail a Article 25 measure? I think so, but it does seem like from the case law that it is in so many cases an add-on when we've already found a particular violation. Tell me what you learned from looking at such a large number of cases. Is it a law, that I'm breaking because I don't use a certain privacy enhancing technology that is available in the market that could be used, but I actually haven't violated the rules? I have a good contract. Everything was handled properly. Only the necessary data was collected. Is this a chapter with legal capacity of its own?
Yes. So, just as a preliminary remark, because we didn't mention that, we tend to say this obligation, where actually we have two distinct obligations. So because I have a legal background, I want things to be clear. So we have one obligation which is really broad, it's data protection by design, and then the other one on paragraph 2 of Article 25 is data protection by default. So now, moving to the interesting finding, we do see that DPAs have very divergent interpretations when it comes to the preventive nature of Article 25 GDPR. In other words, for some DPAs, this article can be applied on its own. For others, not at all. And I'm going to give examples to make it a bit more clear what I'm talking about. So I'm going to start with Austria. There we had a citizen complaining that a public repository did not implement sufficient measures, and therefore, in the hypothetical case of a data leak, his right to secrecy would be violated. Here, it's really important to see that the Austrian DPA said that because no data leak has occurred, at least yet, thus no data protection principle has been violated and no data subject right has been violated, the citizen only has a subjective legal claim which cannot be accepted. So we see here that the Austrian DPA doesn't really understand this article to have this full preventive capacity. And the same thing was said by the Finnish DPA. So here we have a case in which a company was asking for health personal data, but it would be contrary to the data minimization principle and to Article 25 GDPR. But because the processing didn't occur yet, he didn't start. The Finnish DPA only issued a warning. So again, we see here that the full potential of having a full preventive nature is not confirmed. And then we have another block of cases which say the exact opposite thing. And we have a case from Belgium, for example. Here, a Belgian public authority opted for Microsoft products and services. And essentially, it asked citizens to create a Microsoft account in order to access tax related documents. And very interestingly, the Belgian DPA said that even if no processing has occurred, for example, the citizen didn't create a Microsoft account, Article 25 can still be applied. So here, even if we don't have a breach of another article of the GDPR, Article 25 can be applied. And this is exactly what the Irish DPC said in the context of Instagram services and the processing of children's personal data. So here, the Irish DPC said that Article 25 reflects to potential harm, to possible risks, and to exposure to danger. So we don't really need to have the exploitation of a child. if we have a risk for that exploitation and we don't have a measure tackling this risk, Article 25 GDPR can still be applied. And just to conclude with this bunch of cases, the Italian DPA in another case said that the controller has to have a proactive approach to how he designs the processing activities and not a reactive one. So, as you said, we don't have a clear landscape on can this article be applied on its own, or do we have to have another breach of the GDPR? But still, I think this is the point where you say, well, it was worth it to summarize 160 cases because we did find this divergence there, and we can work through it. We can just observe it, and then we can try, and work our ways through how we will move forward.
Well, look, I think when we produce these, we have a number of audiences in mind. Certainly, one audience is practitioners who, want to understand what their obligations are. But another audience, frankly, is data protection commissioners who, are busy, are doing enforcement, or working on opinions across Europe and so forth. It's a unique and I think valuable piece of work to pull and share with them as well. Sort of this deeper look into what their colleagues are doing so that they can, reflect and maybe understand the differences or, have some really good visibility into that activity. And that's, I think, something the team now has done, in a couple of very valuable reports. Rob, I know that one of the Dutch cases caught your eye, a pretty sizable fine to a Dutch hospital.
Yeah, it actually is similar to the Italy case that Christina just brought forward. And the interesting thing of the Dutch case is that the Dutch Data Protection Authority imposed a fine of 440,000 euros on the Amsterdam hospital OLVG, and it really caught the news back in the day. The hospital had taken too few measures between 2018 and 2020 to prevent access by unauthorized employees to medical records. And this was due to insufficient control over who viewed which file and inadequate security of computer systems. So this is about a mix of technical and organizational measures. Following the Dutch DPA's investigation, the OLVG hospital implemented the required improvements. But the Dutch DPA concluded after its investigation that it did not structurally handle access to medical records properly. So this has a component of default into it as well. So a quick summary of the two violations, because there's a lot to learn from these two. The first one is that the hospital should track and regularly monitor who is accessing which file. This allows the hospital to identify in a timely manner when someone consults a file, when they should not, and take action against it. And the hospital kept automatic records, so logging of which employee accessed which medical file, but they did not check the logging. So that's an additional technical and organizational step that was missing. So they did not check the logging often enough for unauthorized access. So this shows the level of detail that a DPA is willing to zoom in on when it comes to the preventative nature. And this ties a little bit to the question that Tara posed. Should the complaint be based on Article 22 GDPR? Well, it depends, because this actually is related to a data breach. But it really depends on the strategy of the complaint and whether you cast a wide net enough, the net wide enough, for instance, in combination with Article 5 or Article 32. So the second violation the Dutch DPA saw was that good security involves authentication with at least two factors, so the multi-factor authentication. But the interesting thing to learn here is that obviously logging from the internet to resources in the hospital should require multi-factor authentication. But Dutch DPA ruled that in this case, also inside the hospital, so within the infrastructure of the hospital, within its parameters, two-factor authentication should be the default. So much of this is about norms, about where the default should be. And obviously this relates to the the state of technology, which is not fixed. The technology changes, capabilities change, and to that extent, technical or organizational measures should follow. So this is, I think, a really good thing to learn. And maybe in addition to that, because you mentioned your ambassador badge, I hear from practitioners sometimes that it's actually not that easy to be compliant in terms of privacy and data protection, let's say Article 25. So the practitioners say it's already very, very hard to do security right at scale, and only a few large companies succeed. And then you start adding data protection and privacy on top of it, and that's like a real, real challenge. So only doing data privacy and protection without the security component in mind is just not enough, but it's a really difficult exercise.
Rob, in the report, Christina talks a bit about the obligation being on the controller. And I wonder if you both could discuss this a bit more. There has been, I think you may have even noted, some examples of enforcement on the data processor alone, although the example that you were flagging was actually a pre-GDPR. So comments from perhaps both of you on, what's the notion of this applying only to a controller or processor? How does that get allocated when it comes to this kind of question?
Well, let me start with a pre-GDPR example and then hand to Christina. I've seen a case where enforcement was done solely on the data processor. And this was with the Article 13 of the Dutch implementation of the then Privacy Directive, the 9546 EC. And the reasoning behind that was that a processor has an independent responsibility when it comes to the protection of personal data due to its specialized role. They are in control of the infrastructure. They know best how to handle the data. And this, at the time, was enough to basically look at an independent data processor.
Yes, so indeed, this obligation is burdening the controller. The thing is that in the cases that we see, the relationship between processors and controllers is under increased scrutiny. So, for example, in the case that I mentioned before, in which the Belgian Public Authority opted for Microsoft's products and services, the Belgian DPA noted very, very clearly that it was the authority that opted for these services. So if these services are not respecting in a way Article 25 GDPR, it is the controller who bears the responsibility to make sure that it does and that they respect Article 25 GDPR. So it is a real burden to the controller, and it is, something to remind them that when they opt for other services and products, they do have to first make an assessment and see whether these products are actually GDPR compliant. And this is, of course, extremely relevant to all the AI developments that we see recently, because we see a lot of companies opting for products of like AI system related products, and this is something to note. And we do have another interesting case, and I can mention now that I remember in this regard. So this is one of my favorite ones. It is from Hungary. And I'm going to give a bit of the background. So in February 2022, the Budapest Bank of Hungary was sanctioned 700,000 euros for breaches of the GDPR, and including Article 25 GDPR. And why is that? The bank decided to use an AI system which deployed emotion recognition to voice recordings of customers. So in simple words, when a customer would call the customer service, the customer was requested to leave a voice note, and the AI system would detect how angry the person was. And if the customer was way too upset, I mean, we have all been upset with bank related issues, it would prioritize the customer for a callback by a human employee. And here the DPA, of course, found many violations, but also data protection by design and by default. And with regards to that, the DPA said that the bank failed to appropriately balance the interests of the company with the data subject's rights, and specifically the right to information, because the controller did not inform the customers that the bank was using this voice analysis software. And the DPA noted specifically that when the technology is that complex, the information granted to data subjects should be given in a comprehensible way. So we see here a bank opting for a service of a third party, and not ensuring that this service is actually GDPR compliant. And this service was, an AI system. So I think this is also important to note.
Kara flags, how could an app that requires access to a contact list be compliant? And I think this is an interesting use case, because I would argue that in the early days of mobile apps, indeed, apps that maybe needed access because they were going to help you connect with other friends on the network, or send a message, or so forth. But the design of the system allowed access to your entire contacts, sometimes even with personal information, passwords or personal, notes. And clearly privacy by design wasn't considered. But I do think what we saw over the years by more sophisticated developers is, all of the contacts will be hashed, and we'll just match whether it matches with your hash. So then we'll upload just that one. So it's the P, or I think the mobile app stores have built-in controls as well, where you might only access, one contact. So I think today we do have examples of some of the more sophisticated and privacy designed apps that have tried to restrict unfettered access, more than what is needed for the necessary elements of the particular service. Our colleague Katerina Demetsu, who leads some of our AI work, flags that the language in the EU AI Act has some really extensive focus on design and development of high-risk AI systems. So interesting to consider that if someone is using maybe some of these large language models, and the large language models say, well, hey, this is a giant crazy thing. It does brilliant things. It does wrong things. It's just use it at your own risk. And then you as the controller are bringing it in and using it for, a purpose, but you should clearly know that it has been designed in a way that cannot be guaranteed to provide the results. Now, perhaps you overlay, this is what, I think some of the big companies who are using ChatGPT are doing. You may overlay, sets of controls so that problems are reviewed or screened out, but you're on notice that you have a, by definition, undesigned, undefaulted, unminimized, tool, and you will indeed be certainly liable for not for somehow not fixing if any of these things are even fixable. Rob, let's talk for a second. Pets, ISO standards, the Euro Privacy Seal. Again, a lot of the legal and compliance people have a lot of discomfort with this section because they look at the words and they say, well, what's enough here? What's, you're saying I need to do the minimum. I need to pseudonymize when possible, but not always. It really calls here for some deeper technical knowledge and some standardization to understand, what is the state of the art that would allow, reasonable maintenance of the service provided while adding the needed technical controls, and that could always be a barrier that develops, right, as new technologies, as new methods of de-identification become feasible without losing utility. The mandate to use those technologies may be sort of a sliding scale. So there's an ISO standard. Is this a mandatory use of privacy enhancing technologies? Can you talk about it a little bit from a sort of standards type perspective?
Yeah, obviously the ISO standards for information security are well known, like the ISO 27000 series. And in some sectors, they are viewed as a default application in terms of technical and organizational measures. I know in the hospital context, it's very important to be able to do like an annual audit. And if in terms of to what extent are we compliant in taking preventative measures, for instance, to prevent unlawful processing. And in order to be able to do such an assessment, you need a well-developed checklist. This is where these standards come in play, specifically the ISO ones. But I also want to maybe connect the Article 25 and bring that in the third item to it, because we're just talking about privacy by design and privacy by default. I think that the third aspect, the approved certification mechanism, needs a little bit attention as well. So the article reads, an approved certification mechanism pursuant to Article 42 may be used as an element to demonstrate compliance with the requirements set out in paragraphs 1 and 2 of this article. And maybe it's good to call out the Euro privacy that was recently approved by the European Data Protection Board. The Euro privacy is a seal. It's a European data protection seal for certification under the Article 42.5 of the GDPR. And it allows controllers to access and formally certify their data processing compliance. Europrice certificates will be recognized in all member states. And this is like the good thing. And although this is a governance framework, it gives organizations the possibility of actually adding certification. So this annual assessment instrument to the mix to assess within the context where data processing is happening, taking into account state of technology that may be changing, also taking into account the volumes of data, the nature of the data, etc., to try to be in compliant as much as they can. So I think it's important to think about, okay, setting out like more principle-based operationalization of compliance is like one thing. The second thing, it's trust but verify, like the verification component. This is where the certification comes in and where instruments like ISO and under the AI Act, we see Sentinel like conformity assessment, the privacy impact assessments, the human rights impact assessments as tools to assess to what extent am I compliant, to provide a beginning of an answer to that question.
Steph Elliott recommends that we look at Section 6 of the recommendations of the EDPB guidelines, where it introduces the concept of producers and processors. Interesting. Okay. Jason Kronk, who has a long history on privacy by design, reminds us about the Institute of Operational Privacy by Design and the Privacy by Design standard. And he and the folks there are working on a second standard with an eye towards achieving Article 42 approval as a certification schema. That actually will be quite interesting to see how that progresses. One of the challenges I see data protection authorities having with ISO standards, on one hand, I think they appreciate, or at least many, the standards development process and so forth. And obviously some of the standards that have become just, essential for security and elsewhere. But I think also the fact that they're not public, there's a fee to access it. Data protection authorities haven't typically been involved in the process, although some have been close to observing and being a bit involved. but it certainly ends up being a gap for sort of smaller controllers who aren't and it's certainly people in the legal world who aren't as familiar with looking to ISO standards. One of our commenters is doing a PhD in this area, so we'll be quite interested to seeing that. What else should we mention from any of the cases that we didn't touch on in perhaps the few minutes that we have left? Any other interesting key takeaways that we didn't flag?
I mean, I don't know. There are so many cases, and like what I like about the structure of this report is that if you're interested in like the controller, you can go to the section of the controller. If you're interested about, data protection principle that has been violated, you go to data minimization and you choose a case. So, I mean, I could also mention about a very interesting case regarding how the data accuracy principle is very relevant, because just briefly mentioning it, the Irish DPC said that the controller has to ensure that he doesn't have inaccurate data in his database, and also that the data was provided to the controller by a financial institution. So even if the data was publicly available, the data controller is still liable to ensure that the data is accurate. And I like this case because it can serve, as again a cautionary tale for businesses collecting data from publicly available sources to train algorithms. So again, we see how data protection by design is relevant to many things, and this is also something that I recently liked. Now that I'm rereading, the report, because every time you reread the report, you may find something new that relates to new developments. So it is an obligation that should be seen, through the recent things happening.
Steph Elliott's flags, and I guess this is from the EDPB guidance, right? Producers and processors should play an active role in ensuring that criteria for the state of the art are met, and should notify controllers of any changes to the state of art that may affect the effectiveness of measures they have in place, and that controllers should include this as a contractual clause. I've not seen that included as a contractual clause, and I would imagine it would be a little complicated to put in a contract. Has that been something seen implemented?
Well, what the DPAs have been constantly saying is that the controller has to have a contract with the processor, and sometimes because of the absence of this contract, Article 25 was violated. So this is something also to note. So this is what I said at the beginning, like the relationship between controllers and processors is under increased scrutiny because this obligation of Article 25 GDPR burdens the controller, but that doesn't mean, that there is more to dig in there. And
they certainly, if you are unable to live up to the terms of the agreement, right? We understand that the processor needs to inform, and we see that in the cross-border issues as well. That they are unable to, comply. But I wonder whether we've ever seen a processor sort of notify a controller, again, that the state of the art has changed. Clearly, there's a flaw, or we're going to make an improvement, but the state of the art has changed, and therefore we are going to make an upgrade as part of that. It clearly, I guess, once the state of once what is a reasonable standard, is established, and at what moment is a reasonable standard established? I was having a debate once on a CPDB panel, where I said, these don't go in, clear stages, right? Where there's a new technology, or there's a potential risk, but it's not serious. And, okay, today it's now standard, right? There's sort of a process where people start implementing some new measure and they see it's effective, or they start becoming aware of a risk. And at some point, a certification or a standards body or so forth. But that is usually, frankly, long after the good practice is to actually go there. So I think it's just tricky to decide when you sort of demand. Let's take some of the de-identification techniques, right? I mean, lots of data processing today happens, in the clear because it's the easiest way to do it, and certainly some degree of sensitive data, is kept in encrypted, form. But when you should do more to obscure more of your data and do techniques on it using some of the more sophisticated, privacy preserving machine learning, versus, well, I'm getting some trade-off. I'm losing the ability to detect bias. I'm losing some accuracy, right? These are, I think, still not fully clear and fully obvious stages. Jason flags that he's not sort of seen that particular clause called out, but I think we understand certainly the goal. Hey, we're going to let people go back to work or end their day if they're in later time zones. Urge folks to take a look at the report. We welcome follow-up questions, and thanks to everybody who joined us and contributed to the discussion. If you're going to be in Tokyo during the G7 in 2 weeks or so, we are holding an event focused on the local Japanese community with many of the regulators who are there for the G7. They're there obviously to talk about things like global data flows, but we'll be taking advantage of the fact that they're in the country to have them talk to the local Japanese community, with translation, of course, about how they are applying AI regulatory activity, how they're applying their enforcement against children, the top issues that many of those regulators, US, Canada, some of the European colleagues, EDPS, how they're applying their enforcement for companies or individuals in Japan that are doing business globally. So should you be in Tokyo, we welcome joining you. Christina, fabulous report. Thank you. Rob, thank you. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you very much.